Hi, I'm Mendy Stoll, and you are on the Seat Suite. Thank you guys for joining. I always love when you join in. And today we have a really interesting guest, Gregory from IBA. He and I had a previous conversation. I just really thought he was such a great guy. He had so much wisdom and instantly just felt like this is someone, if I were selling a business, I would want him or his team to broker my business. So we sat down and I said, Gregory, I want to know more about you and more about your company. So let's start there. How did you get into business brokering? How long have you been doing it? What is IBA? Give us the full scoop.
Mindy, it's my pleasure and it's an honor to be here today. So, this is a family story. My father was a veterinarian in Portland, Oregon, and in the 1980s, he went through a bit of a midlife crisis. He felt that trapped in a way. He liked being a veterinarian, but he had no independence in that a car would hit a dog or an animal would get sick and he would have to come in on weekends and evenings to address that issue. And a tipping point was he was a favorite breeder. They did wire-haired dachshunds. And if you can believe this is true, it was a situation where a dachshund needed an emergency cesarean section to deliver puppies. And it was a weekend, it was his anniversary, and he was taking my mom away. And he had three other veterinarians, but none of them would come in and take care of this client. So he had to cancel his plans and go take delivery of the puppies. And it was one of those moments in your life where you realize, I need to change something. So he decided to sell his animal hospital and real estate, and he hired IBA. And IBA successfully sold the assets, and he was very pleased with the outcome. I was still in school at home, and all I learned is I didn't need to clean runs and cages on weekends anymore, which is a nice thing as the oldest son. So I went off to college and pursued a degree in accounting and finance, pursued my first degree. It took me to Kansas City professionally, and I missed the mountains and ocean of the Northwest which I had grown up with. And I decided I'm not going to stay in Kansas City. Wonderful town, but there's a muddy river and not a lot to do. So I came back to the Pacific Northwest and didn't know what I wanted to do next. And my father said, you're a salesman by personality. You've got an accounting and finance background academically. I think you'd be good at selling businesses. So he introduced me to the founder of the firm, Bill Osofsky, and I decided to join them in 94. And 32 years later, as the shirt I'm wearing shows, I'm still here.
I love that story. And why do you think that? I mean, he obviously probably could have sold the business to anybody. Why do you think he thought, you know what, Greg's the right person to sell this business to?
So I joined the company in 94 and was a broker under Bill and emerged as one of the top salesmen, actually selling two business models that don't exist today. One was travel agencies when we used to have chains, and the other was ISPs, the old internet service providers, when we used to have 10,000 people networks, and took over management of the firm's Bellevue office in 1997. And in 2000, Bill Osofsky was ready to retire, and he decided to approach me about being his successor. I knew the team in place, and we're a little bit like a real estate office in that the brokers on the team could go to the four corners if they didn't like the transition, and he didn't want to disrupt their income, their lives. They knew, liked, and trusted me. Many had mentored me. We had an old guard of brokers. And so I was embraced to take over the helm. And for the last 26 years, I've been running the company. And at this stage, as you touched on, have 10 offices throughout Oregon and Washington and 20 M&A intermediaries doing deals.
And tell me, why do people come to IBA, right? And you have such a unique position that there's 10 offices, which there's so many of them are being bought up and, in so many ways, and you still have this very personalized touch. And what makes a good broker, and what should people be aware of? And why do people come to IBA?
IBA was built on essentially 5 platforms, which some were from the prior ownership and some I added. But we try to be market leaders in knowledge, experience, and skill, to employ best practices whenever possible and always have integrity. The overarching corporate principle at IBA is the golden rule of do unto others as you want them to do unto you. And I tell all my brokers, treat our clients like you're representing a favorite aunt or uncle, and just give them the exact same advice you would give that aunt or uncle, and you'll be fine.
I love that. I think that's such a good principle to live by. I recently had a client where I had to tell them that, it I knew other people might exaggerate the facts to win the client, and I didn't do that, and I knew it might cause me not to win the client, but I felt it was the same principle you're talking about. And I think that creates a reputation. That's why people want to work with IBA, right? They know that they're going to get the facts and they're going to get straight talk, and they know that people are looking after their vested interest. And that's a great principle to operate by. And that obviously sounds like that makes a great broker. And what are some things, if I'm selling my business, what things should I look for when I'm looking for a broker, and what things should I maybe look to avoid?
2 things that you should look for. There are 2 business models in business brokerage. So IBA's business model is 100% paid on performance, and you don't pay us a penny. We primarily represent the seller side of the transaction until the transaction is completed. The other business model collects retainers, charges, administrative consulting fees. And one of my problems with that business model is the brokerage can get paid and the client cannot achieve their outcome. So we are 100% in the same boat with goals aligned with our clients. And I was just talking to one of my brokers, Aaron Ward, today, who is closing a marine industry company at the end of the month. And he was talking about another potential client he had met with, who the party was charged $50,000 up front and asked to sign a 3-year engagement contract. And they were a year in and hadn't got any offers and had had very little interest in their business. And Aaron and I were just discussing how that's just fundamentally wrong. And both valuation processes start with providing a professional opinion of value. So whether you are paid on performance like IBA or upfront like the other company, both will start with providing a value of what they believe can be achieved in the market. Well, IBA is 100% accountable for that number, because otherwise we're wasting our time working on the project. And we will have an open and honest conversation on why we believe that business is worth that. I can tell you Seth Rudin, one of my high performing brokers, just came back from a meeting with a beverage manufacturing company, and their company was worth about $12 million. They needed 20 million due to some debt and other issues at time of sale. And they did not debate our value. They said, Seth, would you take this business to market at 20 million? And he said, no, there's no market for it at that price. It's a really nice $12 million company, maybe in a dynamic marketplace with competition. We get 13, 14 because they can get bidded up. But setting off for 20, I'm going to lose credibility in the market because buyers, their CPAs, CFOs, their banks, their investors, there's no dumb money. All of them are going to come to a valuation conclusion. It could be plus or minus 10%, but it's not going to be dramatically off from the 12 million we talked about that we thought it was worth. And we're trying, because we're paid on performance, to achieve the best outcome. Tell me why a firm like ours would want to leave dollars on the table. It just doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't make any sense at all. And so it sounds like, and how many brokers do you have in your 10 offices? And I know you said they specialize by industry as well, which is great. They become an expert.
I have approximately 20 at a given time.
20. Okay. And why does somebody become a business broker? This is so interesting to me because it is such a very interesting field, and it's not something you typically walk into overnight and have this amazing successful career overnight.
Business brokerage, in my opinion, is an under-credentialed profession. You need credentials to be an attorney. You need credentials to be a real estate broker, which all of my team are, so that they can sell real estate along with a business when they own both assets. You need it to be a CPA, a variety of elements. You actually need no credentials to be a business broker, but you need to understand accounting, finance, tax, law, real estate, business, insurance, finance, all these elements to successfully do it. And it is truly where you need to problem solve. You need to have knowledge yourself, but then also a big Rolodex to bring in people. If it's a company with patents and trademarks, we may need to make sure from a intellectual property standpoint, the proper attorneys and paperwork are involved in the transaction, where that may not relate to many transactions, but there is a slice where we need that piece of knowledge.
Yeah, I know. You're right. You're right. It's so interesting. I hadn't thought of that, but you're right. There isn't any official credential for it, but yet you do need, because it is business, you do need to understand many parts of that business. And I'm sure you have relationships with experts. So if you need to pull them in for a specific reason, you can. But it's very interesting. And I like that you said your team specializes so oftentimes, so that, when they come in, I mean, I'm sure they can sell anything, but they may have particular specialties, right? That they become known for, become experts in, which if I'm selling a business, I want someone who understands my business quite well. So what do you think is trending in your industry right now? What are you seeing that maybe the average person might not see because they haven't been doing it as long, and maybe they aren't as involved?
Let's touch a minute on the specialization, because that's something we shouldn't gloss over. Many firms will say they're generalists and they can sell anything. I actually believe you need a broker who knows your industry, because each industry has different nuances. If we're selling hospitality businesses, you need to know the liquor license transfer process in the appropriate state.
Yes.
And it can delay the sale months if you don't know how to fill out that paperwork and guide that process. And restaurants are the most common business done by entrepreneurs and sold in the marketplace. Now, if it's a preschool, you have different licensing requirements and need to know whether they're in compliance in terms of teacher children ratios and those sort of things. And that's just the start of all the different industries. So, one reason brokers affiliate with me is I've been doing this 32 years. IBA has done over 4,400
Very
transactions.
cool.
I've done over 300 myself. And so we can go back into our history and it may be 3 years, it may be 7 years before COVID, and say, here's a reference point with something similar that we can gain knowledge because maybe we pull up the purchase and sale agreement and see how the attorneys work through a specific issue that's not common, but does occur. I mean, there are lunar and solar eclipses. If you walked outside every day, odds are you would never see one. But if you keep track, they do cycle through periodically. And to me, that's the same in business brokerage or law or a variety of professions. People shouldn't discount knowledge, experience, skill on how to navigate situations.
That is so well put. You and I talk, and I have an AI agency and people, it's really interesting. People think they're hiring me for the AI, but when we get into conversation, there's a business discovery and a business audit that I go through, and they realize what they're really hiring me for is the strategy backed by AI for scale and speed. And so that's really interesting what you're talking about. And I was talking to someone else that she does acquisition, hotel acquisitions. And she was saying that they're creating all this custom AI to run their analytics. And she was saying, I think these jobs we're going to see less and less of them. And I said, well, I would argue it's also going to change the type of person that you're going to hire for the job, because they're not going to need to plug in analytics as much as they are going to need to have strategic critical thinking, because the AI is what you put into it, right? So if someone can spend their time not having to create the data, and that's done very quickly, they can spend their time on the strategy of positioning the sale or looking at trends and interpreting those. So I so understand exactly what you mean by that. And what do you think is trending in terms of in your industry that people aren't seeing?
And as we talked, AI is going to change the world. There's no question about it. And like you were talking about, it's asking AI the right question. If you ask AI, give me a recipe for cookies, you're probably not ending up with oatmeal raisin. I mean, you will just get a generic answer. Here's how to make a basic sugar cookie or a chocolate chip cookie or whatever it is. But if you actually need a unique answer, you really need to train the AI to call the information you need. And when you talk about things are trending, one of them is, how can I AI to enhance a company? And you and I have talked about being able to market for your target customer, something AI can do well, but then you again tapping into that knowledge and experience, you need to engage with the business owner, the sales manager. What is that target customer? If you're wrong geographically, if you're based in California, finding someone who needs a new air conditioner in Florida isn't really that beneficial.
Yeah, it's so true. And you're right. I love what you said. And really, what I see in that trend is the smart business owners are adopting the AI, but they understand the personalization still belongs to the human, the relationships. AI is very good about personalization. It's very good about identifying patterns. It's very good about finding the ideal client, but it's not good at relationships. And I don't think that's going away. That's the piece that is so important and is going to remain. And I hope that as we all start to adopt it, it allows us to do, in my opinion, what's the most important, which is be in front of people and have these conversations and relationships and develop them. So it's interesting that you're seeing it trending through what you're doing as well, which makes sense. And I guess the next question I would ask you is, on your own personal journey, what's an aha moment that you've had as an entrepreneur? Because, entrepreneurship can be very lonely or very exciting. And so I always love when a guest has an aha moment when someone's listening and they think, why didn't I think of that? Or, oh, I was ready to quit today, but that just changed everything. So what's been a great aha for you in your entrepreneurial journey?
I believe I have one that ties to our AI discussion, which everyone likes to prioritize efficiency in their lives. And we primarily work with an older demographic in what we do. baby boomers selling their businesses and others. And so something I recognized a number of years ago is we get inquiry from someone interested in selling by email. We pick up the phone and respond on in person, engage with them with the primary objective to close them on a face to face meeting. I emphasize to my team keep the call short, under 10 minutes. Get enough information to know whether you're potentially interested in the project, and then book the meeting and do it. Give them choices. Are you available Wednesday morning or Thursday afternoon? Because then it's not a yes no answer. And those type of things, leaning into that high touch personal element is foundational to us. And again, busy people want to be efficient, but take the time, meet with people in person, pick up the phone and call, do a Zoom where you can see them and talk more personally. Don't text, don't email.
Yeah.
They are not, they're good administrative communication, but they are not good for building rapport and relationship.
100%. And that's so true. And I think that's great because I noticed that, as we move through life, we tend to communicate more by text and email. And especially my son's generation, who that's just, they don't really pick up the phone. I mean, they might FaceTime each other on occasion, but most of the time they're texting. And I think sometimes that gets lost in translation as we have the younger generation entering the workforce, understanding that the best way to build a relationship, like to your point, you don't need a lot of time, but you need to look somebody in the eye. You need to have that phone call. So I think that's such important advice and a great aha for especially people entering. But you also told me it was interesting. You said we're really busy, and I said, well, why? If all the baby boomers selling, and you went through the list of all the types of people that you're seeing selling their business right now, and in a couple, I went, oh, right, that makes sense. Hadn't thought of that. So what were those?
So our clients come from two, three directions. So the first one and the most common is retirement sales. The second is people who have grown bored with an entrepreneurial project or recognize they don't have the knowledge, experience, and resources to take it to the next level. And we all change jobs, we all change directions. And sometimes the reason for changing a job is you're just simply bored. And we get clients who are killing it. They're doing great. They've taken their drive through espresso business from one location, started at 19 to let's say 15 locations, but now they're 33 and they're like, I've done espresso enough. I would like to do something else. I've done well. I enjoy it. I know the industry, but that was my starter business. Now I would like to actually do something else and I have more capital to do it right. So they'll have that monetization event. And then the final is not my favorite to serve, but one I feel obligation to is partnership breakup, divorce, health issues, death. Those sort of issues can create a need for sale, and we're willing and able to help.
I think you also said, if I remember correctly, that you were seeing also people who'd been laid off decide that they want to own a business, that they don't want to be potentially laid off or be an employee anymore. So even though they're on the buy side, but you're seeing that can be some of your buyers. Did I remember that correctly?
You did. So let's walk through the buyer side. So starting at the top, we have private equity, family offices, private companies, public companies growing by strategic acquisition. So they will buy companies. Then we have our historical group, which is people wanting to scratch an itch to be entrepreneurs. They've put in their 20 corporate world, but they always wanted to own their own business. Just slightly off of that is what you just touched on, where people are forced to leave their company. And let's say they're 55 to 65. their spouse is working, they have kids in the community, they own a home, they are connected with friends, family, church, whatever it may be. They don't want to move. So a way to problem solve is to buy a business in their area and take that step to that leadership position, which many times those people who are laid off are thankful for that. I remember Gary Levy, a gentleman that I worked with who bought a business through IBA, was with ConAgra, and he was a top tier VP of sales. He was tired of traveling. So he came into my office and I met with him and his wife, Renee, started understanding what they liked. And they ended up buying a kitchen store and ran it at a regional mall for another decade or so to bridge that gap till they were ready to retire. And then we sold it to someone else. And the beauty of buying a business is that, unlike a job, you can sell it at the end of your tenure. You're going to have gotten an annuity of income over a period of time. Then you also get an exit value. No different than buying a dividend generating stock.
And you also have incredible tax write-offs compared to being an employee. Because if you're a high income earning employee, as my old CPA used to say back then, you're the designated victim, because I was paying nearly 50% in tax. And then contrast that with owning a business, it's really nice to have that tax benefit as well. So there's all those things you talked about, maybe something to pass along to your children or something to have a liquidity event. And, and usually the last person to get fired is the owner or the boss. And, if you've been through corporate or been through it, there's been reorganizations and layoffs and firing and all sorts of things that aren't necessarily in your control. And when you own a business, you have complete control. It also means you have complete responsibility. It's not for everybody, but I certainly can't imagine going back and working for anyone again. That would be so unusual after you've had that entrepreneurial spirit. And I think you and I were talking, you were saying, yes, being a business broker is very addictive. Once you really, and I think that's true. When you're an entrepreneur, it's very addictive because it's really quite fun, actually. But you have to have the right mindset for it. And that, I think, is key. I think that's really key. What do you notice your most successful business owners have for their mindset?
I'm going to pause 1 second and just an interesting final group that's buying businesses is the younger generation is listening to podcasts, engaged with social media. And it's fascinating to me. The 20 to 30 somethings, they do not want to be employees. They want to be influencers or entrepreneurs, and they see that as the ladder up in American society. And so those are also knocking on our doors looking to buy businesses. And that one hasn't always been there because traditionally you'd graduate college and you'd get a job and you'd do a couple decades before you try to launch. Now the younger generation wants to launch much quicker.
I think that's so true. It's an interesting observation because, previously for our generation, the internet came around and it gave people the opportunity to own businesses they might not normally. But you're right. I think with the social media generation, it's given them more of a peek faster into entrepreneurship, and they are realizing they can create their own destiny through it. And easier now than ever between AI and social media and internet. It's if somebody's really ambitious and hungry, there's not the same barrier to entry that we might have seen 30, 40, 50 years ago, at least from a knowledge perspective. And so I think that's an interesting observation. And our son talks about that since he was 8 years old. He says, I'm going to have a tech business. I'm going to create a mech suit. I'm going to sell it to the government for defense. And then I might open it. I mean, he's 8 years old. I'm like, I wasn't, then he is 8. I'm like, I know I wasn't talking like this at 8, but this is what they see and they're exposed to. So it's very, very interesting
I
to,
was just reading in the Wall Street Journal fascinating story about two kids who were fascinated by drones and started repairing and understanding how they fly and such. And they just got a huge government contract to make drones for the US military. And literally, they started at 19, fascinated by drones. It was a great story in the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, it's so, and I think that's it now, right? I mean, there's no reason because you think of like when we were trying to do things like that, we would go to the library, we would get a book, or we'd look it up in the internet. Now it's 30 seconds of Chat GPT or 30 seconds of a YouTube video, and you can literally figure out anything you want very quickly. And so, yeah, I love seeing those stories. And it also, to your point, is why you have these 20 and 30 somethings knocking on the door saying, I want to buy a business. But what do you think? What have you seen from your business owners? There really is a mindset, I think, in being an entrepreneur. Have you seen a common thread with some of your business owners that are selling that you think contributes to their success?
Well, I think you need to be resilient. You are going to go through adversity. It's how do you respond to that adversity? I mean, you're going away for a weekend and a key employee quits. And now what are you doing? Or your top customer goes bankrupt. There are so many things that can happen to a business owner that are beyond your control when you do everything right. I think you need to evolve. I think you need to be willing to change because what worked in the past may not work in the future. I may have mentioned this when we talked previously. I look at and Amazon today fulfills virtually everything for everyone. Well, if you went back 100 years, Sears did that from a catalog platform. And if Sears had put their catalog online from their store platform with brick and mortar, there never would have been an Amazon, and Sears would still exist today. So Sears didn't evolve, though what Amazon did was nothing more than the Sears catalog we got as kids and circled the Christmas gifts we would like.
I remember telling my son that you would order from the catalog and it would take 2 or 3 weeks. He'll say it's going to take 2 days from Amazon. And I say, yeah, it used to take 2 or 3 weeks. And now sometimes with Amazon, you order in the morning and you have it in the afternoon. It's just, they keep working to best themselves. But it's interesting what you're saying. It's adapt, evolve or die, right? It's just how the nature of business. And and you're right. I mean, essentially they did the same thing, but one moved into a modern conception and one didn't. And one didn't make it and one thrived. So it's a very interesting comment. And you're right, resiliency, because I do think that people have to understand entrepreneurship is, it's a series of sometimes putting out fires or solving problems. And, how do you react to that? What's your perception? How do you handle that? Because that's going to be your experience. And you become the lid on your business. So if you want to grow the business, you have to grow you. Right. And so that's the piece that people sometimes miss. I always tell people business is won and lost here first. And so, you have to have the mind right. But it's such an interesting comment. And because you've seen it all, right? I mean, after 300 sales personally, 4,400 over, 30 some years, like obviously you've seen a lot. What do you think the biggest takeaway is that people should know about selling a business?
I think you should surround yourself with quality advisors. And that team is a good attorney because they're going to address trailing liability issues or assigning liability to the seller if you're the buyer. So make sure that you are legally protected because a business is a living, breathing thing with a history in the future. Then you touched on taxes. Make sure you have a good CPA to look at it from the seller side and allocate the purchase price to mitigate taxes because there can be double digit ranges in the tax liability based on what you call it in the transaction and allocate it. You may want a professional intermediary like myself. Their Assets are A, they're a trusted guide who have been down this path before. B, they're going to know how to detail out your business and put it in the best light for scrutiny. And they're going to know how to negotiate the best terms and know what is achievable. I know where the middle of the fairway is on some issues that may not be financial, where if I can get the buyer and seller to recognize that's a fair middle ground solution, then we're not paying $500 an hour for an attorney to argue from the right and left. And at the end of the day, you end up in the middle ground and it's cost you $4,000 or $5,000 to get there. Where for me, it was obvious where that was from day.
It's such a good point, Greg, because you know what? You have such a great way of explaining things that make it so simplistic and straightforward. But that's a really good point that people don't consider. If you really can't come together, you are going to spend that money through an attorney and you're going to probably end up in the middle, which with all your years of experience, you can kind of draw from the past and figure out what worked, what didn't work, what kind of makes sense, and get them there without having to pay an extra 4 or 5. I hadn't even thought, but it makes so much sense. What
One
else were you saying?
and entrepreneurs, and I love this, are used to making executive decisions. And I always say, if we listen to our attorneys 100% of the time as entrepreneurs, we'd make no money. They're afraid of their shadows. You need an entrepreneur that says, yes, I could get hit by a car walking across this road, but I am willing to take the risk because I don't want to walk all the way to the crosswalk, though that is legally what you should do. And you've probably done that thousands of times outside your office to get to the coffee shop across the street, and you accept that risk. It's not the end of the world of accepting some risk.
Yeah, see, another good way to put it. It just becomes so clear. But yeah, it's true because attorneys are thinking mitigation, risk mitigation, legality. They're not thinking, risk taking and kind of what the reasonable human would do as an entrepreneur. So that's kind of an interesting assessment of it. What
And
else?
in their defense, to close on that, to defend the attorneys, they have seen the worst case scenarios, the different body of work that I have. You talk about IBA doing 4,400 plus transactions. Less than 1% of those end up in some sort of post closing issues. But an attorney
That's all they see.
gets the issues. Well, their body of work is just different to evaluate.
Yeah, that's so true. That's all they see. That's absolutely true. And so that will make you look through that lens for sure. And so, what else do you think that people need to be aware of in selling or buying that they might not be thinking of?
Well, I would say an environment of full disclosure is to everyone's advantage.
Okay.
I tell Southside clients it's a safe harbor because if the buyer knows it, they can't come back and criticize you. If you say, I have a fleet of trucks, and honestly, 5 of them are going to need new tires this winter, then they know it. But if you never let them look at the trucks and there's an accident in the future because the tires went bad and the buyer never even looked at the trucks personally, then maybe you have some liability. So you want to disclose it. On the buyer's side, you want them to go in with open eyes so they can correctly assess the risk. The last thing I ever want is someone to buy a business and not know something that's material and then be detrimentally impacted. If you have your lead salesman is 77 years old, they're a widower, are this is their family, but every year they say, I think I'm going to retire. And they've always held their customers tight in their fist. If you sell the business and they do retire and move to Arizona, you have wanted to highlight Joe's 77. He's threatened to retire the last 5 years. He may really be here another 5 years because this is who he is, but I can't guarantee he stays, then at least it's out in the public domain.
And if you can tell a business owner today, like let's say they're going to go back and you could tell them today what they wish they would have known 5 years ago to be prepared for a sale, because I think a lot of business owners just build their business and they may or may not be thinking about selling, and there's actually a lot that goes into that process, and they may not be positioned for it, aware of it, thinking about it, and they may end up doing a lot of work getting ready for that. What would you tell them? Like, hey, if you're starting a business now and you love that business, it's great. Even if you plan to hold it for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, someday you may want to sell it. Here's some things you should be aware of or thinking about or doing. What would you tell them?
Two things. First of all, have crystal clear financial records, because at time of sale, those are going to need to be reviewed by a buyer, their CPA, CFO, banker, investor, and you will get a higher value if there's clarity in your financial record. On the other side, take the business to a place where you're working on the business, not in the business. I always believe mature business owners delegate. You need The easier you are to replace, the higher the value of the business. It opens you up to the private equity or the corporate buyers, because they're not going to fill your shoes. They're going to put someone in as the general manager or president of that company division. They can't need to be there themselves. And it's even better if you have your successor already in house that could be promoted to fill your shoes.
Such great advice. Such great advice. Is there anything else you want us to know, you want the listener to hear before we wrap up?
Nothing really, Mindy. I would say if you're interested in learning more about buying and selling businesses, you might go to our website, which is ibainc.com. So Ice Cream Boy Apple, Ice Cream Nancy Charlie.com. In two sections to look at are we have a blog that publishes multiple times a week that has had over 200 authors that probably has an article relevant to the issue you're wanting to learn about. And then we have a video page that has corporate videos and then podcasts like this one where you can listen to myself and my colleagues cover a range of topics, and the best decisions are made from a foundation of knowledge. So, I say embrace the possible and go for it as an entrepreneur. But before you leap, research and think. And tossing the ball back to you, AI creates more ability to research quickly and effectively than we've ever had.
Absolutely, 100%. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I really enjoyed our conversation prior and now, and I thank you for being on. I really enjoyed you as a human. I really enjoyed your knowledge, and I think somebody would be lucky to have you represent them or your firm. So I'm glad you shared your website, and thank you for being on, Greg. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.